I'm sitting here today with Doug Gilding. Doug is a Florida inmate that has been in prison for over 24 years for what basically amounted to a 10-minute conversation in a car, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I want to thank you so much for being here with us today and giving us your time. Just to kind of get things started, give us an explanation of what is the Felony Murder Rule, also called FMR.
Okay. So the Felony Murder Rule it's really an outdated legal concept, and the United States is probably the only developed nation that still has this law on the books. Felony murder uses what's called the doctrine of inferred intent. So without getting too far in the weeds on the legal mumbo jumbo, basically it takes an unintentional manslaughter that's committed during a felony and it turns it into a first-degree premeditated murder. So for instance, if you and a buddy rob a gas station and the cashier gets killed, that would be felony murder. So even if your buddy killed the cashier and you had nothing to do with it, under the Felony Murder Rule, you're still guilty of felony murder. And let's take it a step further. So even if you were the getaway driver, let's say, and you were sitting outside in the car, under the Felony Murder Rule, you're still guilty of the murder committed by your co-defendant. And it can get really convoluted. And there's a lot of debate about the concept, and some states have already begun changing the laws, but Florida prosecutors consider the Felony Murder Rule a valuable tool in the toolbox.
Okay, so thank you for that. And now if you could, I'd like you to tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your case, because your case falls under the Felony Murder Rule. You were sentenced under the Felony Murder Rule, so.
Sure. Well, my name's Doug Gilding, and I grew up in a small town outside Portland, Maine. And then after high school, I decided to go to college in Florida. So I'm on my 25th year now in prison for, like you mentioned, what basically amounts to a 10-minute conversation in a car. And since I've been in prison, I became a law clerk and I teach GED classes for other inmates. So how did I get here? Well, in May of 1997, my roommate and I were playing pool at a bar in Longwood, Florida called Suzanne's Oyster Pub. I knew that my roommate did some recreational drugs, but I was definitely guilty of being a bad judge of character with him. So he had gone into the back office to buy some cocaine. And when he came out, he went to the payphone and then he told me we had to go meet somebody. So I figured he'd put together a drug deal or something. And we pulled into a parking lot down the road. We were in his van. He was driving. I was a passenger. Then 3 other guys pulled up and they jumped in the back of the van. So I only knew one of them. I didn't know the other 2. So my roommate started telling these guys about a safe in the back office of Suzanne's that was full of drugs and money. And then he drew him a map of exactly where the safe was. And after some conversation, the other 3 guys got back in their car and they left. So my roommate and I headed home. We went to bed. And then early the next morning at closing time, the other 3 guys robbed Suzanne's. And during the robbery, they ended up shooting a guy at the bar. It was a terrible situation all the way around. And in addition to the loss of life, it changed a lot of people's lives that night, mine included. All 5 of us got arrested a couple weeks later. And I was initially offered a plea deal for 52 months, which is 4.5 years in prison. But the prosecutor said I would have had to testify and put the other guys on death row. So I refused the deal. And the prosecutor was mad at me. The next day, he served death penalty papers on me and said that I was going to fry. So I was charged under the Felony Murder Rule and was facing a life sentence for just talking in a car, basically. So since I wouldn't testify, the prosecutor offered my roommate the 4.5-year deal. He jumped on it. And I took it to trial. And I had court-appointed attorneys who put up zero defense for me. And I was convicted based on the testimony of my co-defendant, who lied and said that I was the one who told them where the safe was. So the jury bought it, hook, line, and sinker, and here I am.
So you were charged under the Felony Murder Rule for the death that occurred during the robbery of the bar. So you were never actually charged with committing the crime then. You were just charged under the Felony Murder Rule because there was a death in the commission of a crime.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, no,
So,
I was given a life sentence for just talking about it.
yeah, that was it. When they went to the bar to commit the crime, where were you at that time?
I was home in bed. I was home in bed sleeping when they went and committed the crime, hours later. But yeah, I was never actually charged with committing the crime. They found me guilty as this non-present principal to felony murder, which is kind of a tenuous legal concept that casts a wide net on anybody who's involved in any type of conspiracy or accessory before the fact to a felony. And you don't even need to be present when the crime is committed. Like me, I was home in bed when it happened.
So the prosecutor in your case chose to charge you under the felony murder rule. And one thing that I know, my understanding of the felony murder rule, our judges have no discretion in cases like this. This is solely on the prosecutor to charge under the felony murder rule. And basically the judge's hands are tied and they have no discretion in cases like this. So that brings us to actually the topic itself, the felony murder rule and its application.
I just want to mention, when my judge sentenced me, he was actually apologetic when he sentenced me. And he said sometimes people of lesser culpability get swept up in this web of laws, but that his hands were tied and he had no choice but to give me mandatory life without parole. So it really is a shame that even the judges see the flaw in this law.
And one thing I'd like to point out also at this time, when criminal trial is taking place, particularly under felony murder rule, the jury is not aware of a life or death sentence. That felony murder rule only carries a life or death sentence, correct?
That's right. And we're not allowed to tell them that at trial.
No. So anyone serving on a jury in a felony murder rule case typically is not aware of felony murder rule and also is not aware that it only carries a life or death sentence. This is something that we here at H.E.A.R.T have taken very seriously to focus on, particularly the felony murder rule, because of the fact that it charges people for a homicide they didn't commit, a crime that they didn't commit. So I'm glad that you are here to tell us your story today and have joined the efforts here at H.E.A.R.T. But I do have to ask you, what made you decide to write a reform bill?
Well, I've watched over the last few years, and there hasn't been much success in getting any criminal justice reform bills passed, particularly felony murder reform in Florida. It seems like the failed bills might have been a little too ambitious, trying to totally eliminate the felony murder rule. And this approach has worked in some other states, but Florida is fairly conservative. So, like I said before, the state attorneys view the felony murder rule as a valuable tool in their arsenal. So I decided it was time for a new approach. I put together a reform bill that doesn't actually delete any provisions of the felony murder statute at all, but instead it creates a new category for lesser participants to felony murder. So the bill specifies what constitutes a lesser participant, and basically it's someone who played some part in the crime but wasn't a major participant that actually killed someone or helped kill somebody. This category might include getaway drivers or non-present conspirators like myself, depending on the facts of each case. But what it definitely does not include are killers. So the bill does not release any murderers or stop murderers from being prosecuted. And by the very nature of this amendment, it only affects peripheral players in a crime. And it is retroactive. It lays out a procedure for the very narrow class of inmates that qualify to file a petition to review their case.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, getting to your bill. The bill is named the Ryan-Holle Reform Act. I do have a copy. I'd like you to explain about Ryan-Holle and how this came about.
So, yeah, this is the Ryan-Holle Reform Act. It's basically 17 pages of legal mumbo jumbo, but so a few years ago, I read about Ryan-Holle's case. He was a young guy up in Pensacola, and he was partying in his apartment with some friends. One of them had the bright idea to go rob the drug dealer down the road. Now, Ryan didn't go with him, but he did let him use his car. So he stayed home and went to bed. During the robbery, one of his buddies ended up smashing this girl's head in with the butt of his gun and killed her. So it was a heinous crime for sure. But similar to my case, Ryan was home in bed sleeping when it happened. But because of the current felony murder law, Ryan was convicted and he was sentenced to natural life without parole, like me. So Ryan had tried applying for clemency with the governor's office a couple of times and he was denied. But then he did luck out. And a reporter with the New York Times named Adam Liptak actually picked up his story. And he wrote a great article about Ryan's case. I recommend everybody read it. One person that did read it out in California was the actor Charles Grodin, who recently passed away. But he himself ended up writing a couple of articles about Ryan's case. The most recent one was in 2011, for the Nation magazine, I believe. It's a great article. It lays out the whole history behind felony murder rule, and how we're one of the last countries to still use it. I definitely recommend people read it. You should be able to Google Ryan Holle's case and the articles will come up. And also, I believe you're putting up links on H.E.A.R.T, right, Lisa?
Correct. We have the links up on H.E.A.R.T.Florida.org.
Good. So after all this publicity was on Ryan's case all of a sudden, Governor Rick Scott finally decided to take a look at it. Now, as most of you know, Rick Scott's pretty tough on crime. He's a Republican and he's no pushover. And the entire clemency board were Republicans, including the Attorney General Pam Bondi. So this is not an easy crowd for a convicted murderer to plead his case in front of. But when Governor Rick Scott read his case, he said it was one of the most inequitable cases he'd ever seen. And he pointed out a major flaw in the felony murder statute, where somebody could be home in bed when his co-defendants kill someone, and yet the law still holds him equally liable. So Governor Scott said that Ryan should have some level of culpability, but obviously shouldn't have the same life sentence as the guy that actually bashed in this poor girl's head with a shotgun, you know? So the entire board agreed with him and they voted unanimously to commute Ryan's sentence. And after reading about the case and the broken law pointed out by then Governor, and now Senator Rick Scott, Ryan Holle became my inspiration for writing this bill. Here we have a situation where the executive branch has pointed out a flaw in the law. Now, they can't be expected to sift through every case and correct it, you know, even though there's probably not that many inmates currently in the system that would qualify, but that's not the job of the executive branch. That's the job of the legislative branch. It's their job to fix broken laws, and this is definitely an example. So the Ryan Holle Reform Act simply fixes the flaw in the felony murder statute. It was pointed out by Rick Scott. It doesn't let any murderers out of prison. It doesn't even let anybody out that helped kill somebody. All this bill does is bring some logic to the felony murder rule, and it caps how much time someone can get for being a lesser participant at 15 years, which is reasonable. You know, nobody gets off scot-free, and everybody pays a price proportional to their personal culpability in the crime, not to the culpability of a co-defendant. And don't get it wrong, 15 years is a very long time in prison, and a lesser participant will pay their debt to society for their role.
Yeah. So why do you think there's been so much opposition in getting CJR bills in general passed up to now?
Good question. I think a lot of the bills are just too ambitious for the political climate in Florida. The big fear is that a bill is going to release a bunch of murderers to the streets.
Yeah.
And simply eliminating felony murder is a tough sell in Florida. And that actually could allow some murderers to go free. The state attorneys groups and the Florida Sheriff's Association, they value this prosecutorial tool, but they can rest easy because, you know, the Ryan Holle Reform Act does not delete any portions of their felony murder rule. I mean, not a word. There's not a word of deletion. It adds a few things. So they'll still have this tool to use so they can bring all the players in a crime to justice. All the bill changes is the amount of time that a lesser participant can receive in prison. So not a single killer is set free, not even someone who helped to kill her. So hopefully the Florida Sheriff's Association can sleep easy with this one.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. And we will be sharing this link to this video with Florida Sheriff's Association also. And I know we're kind of short on time, so you've explained a lot of things. We've discussed the felony murder rule. We've discussed Ryan Holle's case. In Ryan Holle's case, I did want to point out, I didn't want to interrupt you. Here in Florida, well, nationwide, Ryan Holle's case is the only case charged under the felony murder rule that has ever been granted a clemency. And
That's true.
that speaks volumes in the fact that over the years, over the decades, as often as this statute for felony murder is applied, that Ryan's case was able to succeed in getting clemency, and his sentence was commuted from
And,
a life sentence to
Yeah.
25 years. So he's still serving 25 years.
and it's amazing that that was a Republican governor.
Yeah. Ryan is still serving a 25-year sentence under that commutation for basically, like you pointed out, being home in bed asleep when the homicide actually took place. So I did want to get that in there. And I want our legislators and anyone listening to this to really understand that just to drive that point home, that so many of these cases come up for clemency under felony murder rule, and they're denied. Then Governor Rick Scott pointed out the flaw in this law and charging everyone under that same umbrella. It's not fair. It's not justice. So I do want to ask you one more question. What do you want to say to any legislators who are considering supporting the Ryan Holle Reform Act, the official bill for amending the felony murder rule?
I just want them to realize that the system isn't perfect. Sometimes people that deserve to be in prison, they get off scot-free. And sometimes people that are not a danger to society, they get a life sentence. It happens. And I think that most people, including many politicians, they don't have any idea that somebody can be sentenced to life in prison for a murder committed by someone else, even if they weren't present at the time, they were home in bed sleeping or something. So look, life without parole is essentially a death by incarceration sentence. This is a sentence for people like Charles Manson. It says that somebody is irredeemable, that they're incapable of being rehabilitated. So sure, perhaps for that 5% of criminals that are heinous killers or rapists, for those people, life without parole would make sense. But for the other 95% of us, a life sentence is excessive, and it's a waste of taxpayer money. And certainly for a lesser participant in felony murder, logic would dictate that each person should spend time in prison based on their individual culpability. So society as a whole is not served well by the miscarriage of justice that occurs when you have laws that are so all-encompassing and so ambiguous that people of lower culpability can be given a life sentence without a possibility of parole and basically thrown away. And that's based on an independent act of another person. So the Ryan Holle Reform Act was written specifically to address this issue. And after all is said and done, the bill has a razor-sharp focus. It's not broad encompassing. It's not going to have a mass exodus from the prison gates. It's probably only going to affect a few dozen inmates currently in the system. But what it will do is prevent anyone else from receiving a life sentence for the murder that someone else commits. It's my hope that the Florida legislators will look at this bill with an open mind and with no political agenda, and without fear that by backing this bill that they'll somehow be releasing criminals scot-free, because it's not the case. This bill is about justice. It's not about Democrats. It's not about Republicans. It's about doing the right thing for our fellow human beings. But I know our time is getting short, but I do want to thank you guys there at H.E.A.R.T. You guys have put a spotlight on this issue, and you've helped to get some publicity on the Ryan Holle Reform Act. You guys are fighting the good fight, and myself and other inmates, I know we appreciate it. I'd also like to thank my lawyer, Randy Lambert. He's at the Marco Mero Law Group, for all of his help in the process, and he proofread my early drafts of this bill and made some suggestions. I couldn't have pulled it off without him too. Also, Richard Midkiff, who's lived the nightmare. He spent over 20 years in prison, and he's out there today fighting too. He's lived this. So just thank all of you very much. I appreciate it, and I know lots of us in here do.
Thank you, Doug. Before we end this, Randy Lambert of O'Mara Law Group is actually with us. Hi, thank you for joining us. You'd like to say a few words?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I've been able to listen in on everything that Doug has been talking about, and I've known Doug for probably 4 or 5 years now going through this process with him. And Doug is probably the most educated individual in terms of incarceration that I've ever had the ability to work with. So, I was thinking about one thing as you were talking, Doug. The correctional system is supposed to be, it's supposed to be a punishment. We understand people should be punished for the crimes that they do, but it's also supposed to be rehabilitative and prepare people who are convicted of crimes to be able to re-enter society and be a contributing member of society. And we really didn't get into it, but I think this is a great opportunity for others to understand who you are and what you've done in the last 25 years of your life behind prison to prepare you to be a contributing member of society again. I mean, somebody just doesn't wake up one morning and decide they want to write a bill for the Florida legislature. It's not an easy thing to do, but you have you've educated yourself over the years and prepared you for something like this. So could you talk about this just for a couple of minutes?
As far as what I've done over the years or about the
Yeah.
bill specifically?
Yeah, after what you've done over the years in terms of becoming a paralegal,
Yeah.
your work with the dogs there in Maine. I know you've done that. Just some things
Yeah.
like that.
So, I mean, to be honest, it was a little self-motivated when I first started studying the law because I was so frustrated with court-appointed lawyers and appeals getting denied. I finally went and took the Blackstone course so I could figure out what the heck was going on and write my own appeals and do a better job. Obviously, I'm still here, so I didn't have any luck, but it's been a long journey, and I've been up to the Supreme Court a couple times. The bottom line is the law is so encompassing, it's tough to get around it. And over the years, I also teach GED. So I teach other inmates. I have classes and teach GED, help them get their diplomas so that they can get out and hopefully get a good paying job and not come back here. I also have been in 2 different dog training programs. So I train vet dogs, which are service dogs for handicapped veterans. And now I'm in a canine correction program, which we take dogs from the shelter and give them some basic obedience training and make them a little easier to get adopted out. So I actually have a dog that lives in my cell with me now. And so, I've tried to always participate best I can here in what the good stuff and not to participate in the bad stuff, because there's plenty of that around too. I've always tried to stay positive. As you know, for years, we've been going through appeals, and I try never to just lay down and say, well, it's done. I'm going to do life in prison, because I refuse to believe that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison for a mistake that I made 25 years ago by sitting as a passenger in a car and talking to people. So it's been tough at times, been tough journeys, and it's been highs and lows. But right now, I imagine people that are watching around Florida are wondering about dog program. I'm actually up in Maine right now. I'm at Maine State Prison because I got an interstate compact. This is where I'm from originally. I grew up here. My parents live up here. And it took a lot of years, but I finally did manage to get up here on interstate compact. So if they're wondering what dog program, I'm actually at a different, I'm still a Florida inmate, but I'm up here on an interstate compact. So it's been a rough journey, and I've dealt with lots of attorneys and met lots of paralegals and lots of people, and a lot of them say the same thing you did. Like, wow, you're doing a life sentence? Yeah, life sentence for talking in a car. And I would hope one day that maybe we can talk some legislators into being brave, because it's going to take some bravery going up against the system, because nothing that's going to let anybody out of prison is popular. But it came to a point, we were locked in for COVID last year, and I watched some bills working their way through the Florida legislature, and they weren't making it. And I read these bills and I realized they're almost carbon copies of California. And California is a different state. It's a different state than Florida. Florida is very conservative. California is very liberal. And California was willing to pass some things that don't have a chance in Florida. So I just decided the way to get this done is for me to study and figure out how to write a bill. And that's what I did. My first draft was kind of rough. I sent to you, and we fixed it up and got it decent. But the bottom line is I'm in a unique position, having done a quarter of a century in prison, where I can look at this from the inside, not from the outside, not from a comfortable office with air conditioning, but I can look at this from inside a prison cell and say, what can we fix in this that makes sense for the state of Florida? And in Florida, they want their felony murder rule. So I tried to make a very focused bill that doesn't overturn, doesn't take away felony murder. It's not felony murder elimination like they're trying to do out west. It's just a reform bill that creates a little bit of a category for some logic and sanity in the area that Rick Scott pointed out, that it's ridiculous that a man that's home in bed gets the same sentence as a man that bashes in a girl's head with a shotgun. Those are two different categories of people. One is a heinous murderer, probably a psychopath that deserves to be here. And the other is more along the lines of somebody who made a bad choice, drank too much, and let his buddies take his car to do a robbery. So I just hope that this bill, I hope that we can get some support behind it. I know it's an uphill battle and it's not popular, but that's why I'm here today talking. I want people to be able to understand all this is going to do is take some people that are in prison for life, like myself and Ryan Holle for 25 years now after the commutation, and give us another chance to get out from a mistake we made when we were youngsters. Let us get out and try to have a life. Let me pay some taxes. Let me contribute instead of draining 70 grand a year off the state treasury. Let me get a job and try to pay out. You know, the budgets are terrible. There's so much money dumping into the correctional system. People that were just getaway drivers or peripheral players like myself and Ryan Holle and others, we don't need to be locked away for life. We're not Charles Mansons. And I think 15 years is a fair, I mean, that's a lot of time in prison. They offered me 15 years at trial. I was like, no. Then I went to trial, got life. But 15 years is a long time in prison for being home in bed and talking about something like Ryan did or myself. So I think that a second-degree felony is fair for these lesser participants category, which we've created in this bill. And I would be open to debating that with anybody. Florida Sheriff's Association, Grady Judd, I would be willing to talk. Let's talk logic about what is fair and justice and what serves society as a whole. And I've been in for 25 years now, but I feel like 15 years for my role would have been plenty to teach me a lesson. Don't hang out with those kind of people, make better choices in life. And I hope that's where we're at.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Doug. And I mean, you know, my feelings about felony murder and reform and why we're doing this. And, you know, I could share my opinion, but, you know, like they say, that in 2 cents will get you a cup of coffee. But I feel strongly about the bill myself. I think it's well written. Like you said, it's an uphill battle in the state of Florida. We have a very conservative legislature, and it's not going to be an easy hill to climb. But I think this is a good start. I know this is Lisa's thing, so I don't want to steal her show, but
No,
I just
you're
want to
fine.
say thank you for the opportunity for being here, be able to speak
Sure.
briefly. And
You know, Lisa, let me say, magic can happen with social media. When somebody grabs onto something, they've got a generation of millennials that are in college looking at this and re-looking at it and rethinking some of these harsh punishing laws that were put on the books back in the 80s and 90s. So hopefully we can reach out to some of the newer generation that wasn't part of this, hey, let's lock everybody up and throw away the key, and actually has some rehabilitative goals in mind. So I hope that we can reach out to some of those people, because those people have a loud voice. When they go viral on TikTok, it's amazing that the hundreds of thousands of people that will back something, and suddenly you have somebody like Ron DeSantis paying attention. And he's like, okay, we got 300,000 people petitioning to take a look at this law. Maybe we should do it, because guess what? They all vote.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. You are 100% right. And I've been researching a lot of, we're on Twitter right now. H.E.A.R.T is on Facebook and Twitter. I just want to be able to get this video out
We
to
have to recruit some college kids.
And those are our future judges and prosecutors.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a big movement now. The pendulum seems to be swinging towards looking logically at crimes and how much time serves a rehabilitative purpose, rather than can we just punish somebody because we're mad at them. And things are changing.
Sadly, a lot of these laws, you know, have stuck around, and, you know, we have mass incarceration, we have prison overcrowding, death by incarceration, you know, and taxpayers and voters, we as taxpayers pay the price for that. And people like yourself, my son, Ryan Holle, didn't deserve what they got. I see a lot of the advocates now are mothers, sisters, girlfriends, wives of a lot of incarcerated gentlemen. And I see this one common thing with all of it, whether it's PRR, FMR, the two strikes law. It's not working. It's just not working. It's mass incarceration. Down here in Florida, our state prisons have no air conditioning. It's 94 degrees outside right now. So when you put it all together, the totality of it, serving a life sentence for a crime you didn't commit, the harsh conditions, and just all of it, we are so overdue for reform. I mean, change is coming. I really do believe change is coming. And I am so grateful for you to take your time and what you have done with yourself over the 25 years you spent incarcerated. I wanted to touch on it early on. I really wanted you to tell us more about you. So I'm glad Randy was able to bring that up. I commend you. I mean, what you have done.
I've tried not to make it. I've tried not to make it too much about me. I'm trying to. I mean, as much as I'd like to say woe was me and make it about my case, this really is about a broken law, and it transcends me and Ryan. And there's probably not a lot of guys, but there's enough of us that have been affected by this, and the law needs to get fixed. It really does. When you have a tough on crime guy like Rick Scott pointing it out, you know that there's an issue.
And that was in 2015. Ryan's clemency was granted in 2015. There hasn't been a lot done for reform since that. So it's time, definitely time.
It is time.
So Doug, I want to thank you so much. Maria, thank you so much for your time and everything that you're doing. We're behind you 100%. And we will get this on social media. We will get this on Facebook, Twitter. So Randy, I want to thank you, Randy Lambert from O'Mara Law Group. Thank you so much for your time today. I do appreciate your contribution and in helping Doug get the kinks worked out of the bill and get it nice and smooth. But it really is just about fixing a broken law. And
thanks for having me.
Thank you. I know your time is valuable, Doug. Thank you again so much. If there's anything you need, you know how to reach me. I'm here to help. And I really commend you. Thank you so much. This bill can do so much for so many. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you for the time.
Thanks.